The morning light painted the red walls of the Grand Canyon in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the Bright Angel Trail. It was July 1988, and the early summer heat was already climbing as the Lawson family, 41-year-old Richard, his wife Margaret, 16-year-old twins Jackson and Jeremy, and 12-year-old Olivia, prepared for what was meant to be a day hike, a simple memory to cap their Arizona vacation. "Stay where I can see you," Richard had called to his children as they started down the dusty path, his voice echoing slightly against the canyon walls. Margaret adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, camera dangling from her wrist. It was the last photograph they would take as a complete family, all five smiling, the vast geological wonder sprawling behind them. Few visitors to the Grand Canyon that morning paid attention to the Lawson family. Just another group of tourists, excited and chattering as they began their descent. No one could have predicted that by sunset, two of them would vanish without a trace, setting in motion a mystery that would haunt Bright Angel Point for decades. The family had separated briefly near the 3-mile rest house. The boys, athletic and restless as teenage brothers often are, had asked to push ahead to Indian Garden. "We'll meet you there for lunch," Jeremy had said, adjusting his baseball cap. Richard agreed with a quick caution: stay on the main trail. It was a decision that would replay in his mind for years to come. When the rest of the family arrived at Indian Garden an hour later, the twins were nowhere to be found. What began as mild concern transformed into frantic searching as minutes stretched into hours. Park rangers were alerted. Helicopters scanned the rugged terrain. Search parties combed every possible trail and crevice where two teenage boys might have wandered. The only person who claimed to have seen anything was Olivia. As the afternoon shadows grew longer and the search grew more desperate, she kept repeating the same thing. They went with a man in a ranger hat. He wasn't a real ranger, but no one believed her. She was just a child, traumatized and confused. The official report noted her statement but focused on more plausible explanations. The boys had gone off trail, fallen from a ledge, or become disoriented in the heat. The canyon, after all, claimed victims every year. It was vast, unforgiving, and full of hidden dangers. Days turned into weeks. The search was scaled back, then officially suspended. The Lawson family returned to their home in Minnesota without their sons, carrying only photographs, memories, and unanswered questions. Margaret withdrew into grief. Richard threw himself into work and alcohol. And Olivia never stopped telling her story, even as therapists suggested she create this ranger as a way to process her trauma. "I know what I saw," she would insist, her voice growing firmer as she matured from child to teenager to woman. He wore a tan hat like the Rangers, but his uniform was wrong. He spoke to them quietly, and they followed him down a side path. Over the years, her insistence became a source of tension in the already fractured family. Her parents couldn't bear to hear the story anymore. It gave them a flickering hope that was too painful to sustain. By the time Olivia turned 18, she had stopped speaking about it to them altogether. But she never forgot. Even as she built a life for herself, college, marriage to her supportive husband Dean, a career as an environmental scientist, the memory of that day remained crystal clear, untouched by time. Every year on the anniversary, she would light 2 candles, one for each brother. "Sometimes I dream they're still out there somewhere," she confided to Dean on their 3rd anniversary. "And sometimes I wake up convinced today will be the day someone believes me." As social media emerged in the early 2000s, Olivia cautiously began sharing her story online. At first, it was just in missing persons forums, adding details that had never made it into official reports. Later, she created a simple website, Finding Jackson and Jeremy Lawson. Most responses were sympathetic but skeptical. Some were cruel, accusing her of seeking attention. A few were from self-proclaimed psychics or conspiracy theorists. She learned to filter these out, focusing instead on the genuine questions, the people who seemed to truly care. Then, in the summer of 2018, exactly 30 years after the disappearance, Olivia received an email that made her hands tremble as she read it. I was a seasonal maintenance worker at Grand Canyon in 1988. I think I might have seen the man you described. Olivia stared at her computer screen, the message blurring through her tears. For 3 decades, she had carried the weight of being the only witness, the one person who knew there was more to the story. Now, sitting in her quiet home office with rain pattering against the windows, that weight shifted ever so slightly. She hit reply with shaking fingers and typed, "Tell me everything you remember." Robert Calloway had spent only 1 summer working at the Grand Canyon, a college job that had faded into the background of his memory until he stumbled across Olivia's website. Now, in his 50s, with graying hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, he sat across from Olivia at a quiet coffee shop in Flagstaff, Arizona, nervously turning his cup in his hands. "I never connected it until I saw the photos on your site," he explained, his voice low despite the ambient chatter around them. "But I remember that day because of how strange it was." Robert described a man he'd seen multiple times that summer, someone wearing what looked like a ranger uniform, but who didn't interact with the other park staff. He kept to himself. "I figured he was new, or maybe from another division. The hat was right, but the patches were wrong. I noticed because my buddy collected those patches." Olivia leaned forward, her coffee untouched. "And you saw him that day, July 8th? Robert nodded slowly. "Near Indian Garden. He was walking with 2 teenage boys who matched the description of your brothers. I remember thinking they looked alike. Twins, obviously. At the time, I just assumed he was giving them a private tour or something." "Did you tell anyone?" Olivia asked, her voice catching slightly. "I mentioned it to my supervisor when I heard about missing hikers, but he said the rangers were handling the investigation." Robert looked down. "I was just a 20-year-old kid cleaning trails. When nothing came of it, I figured I was mistaken." This conversation, this validation after 3 decades of doubt and dismissal, changed everything for Olivia. For the first time, someone else had seen what she saw. Her childhood memories weren't fabrications or trauma responses. They were real. Armed with this new information, Olivia approached the cold case unit of the Arizona State Police. Detective Eliza Hammond, a veteran investigator with compassionate eyes and a reputation for thoroughness, agreed to review the file. "Most cold cases like this stay cold for a reason," Detective Hammond warned during their first meeting, her office walls lined with case files and commendations. "But sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective and a bit of technology that wasn't available back then." The investigation moved slowly. Old files were retrieved from storage. Original searchers were contacted, many now retired. Park employment records from 1988 were examined. Most promising of all, the detective managed to locate high-resolution scans of photographs taken by visitors at the Grand Canyon on that fateful day. It was in those photographs that they found him, a figure in the background of a family's vacation snapshot, a man in a tan hat and a uniform-like outfit, standing on a ridge, watching the trail below. His face was indistinct, but his posture and attire match both Olivia's and Robert's descriptions. "This doesn't prove anything," Detective Hammond cautioned, "but it's enough to justify reopening the case." Olivia's parents reacted differently to the news. Her father, Richard, now a sober and subdued man in his 70s, listened quietly to her update over the phone. "Just don't get your hopes up, Livy," he said, using her childhood nickname for the first time in years. "I can't go through that again." Her mother, Margaret, refused to discuss it at all. The decades had not softened her grief. They had calcified it into something brittle and immovable. "I've made my peace," she told Olivia curtly. "Don't drag us back there." But Olivia couldn't stop. With Detective Hammond's cautious support and Dean's unwavering encouragement, she returned to the Grand Canyon in the spring of 2019. The landscape was both familiar and foreign, the same breathtaking vistas, but now crossed with different trails, modern facilities, and the weight of her own memories. They retraced the family's steps from that day, starting at Bright Angel Trailhead. Olivia walked slowly, her eyes scanning the terrain, as if the passage of 31 years might have preserved some evidence, some overlooked clue. "This is where we took that last photo," she said, stopping at a viewpoint. "And this is where the boys asked to go ahead." At Indian Garden, now a busy rest area with a ranger station and water refill station, Olivia felt a strange sense of dislocation. "It was quieter then," she murmured. "Fewer people." Detective Hammond nodded, making notes. "And where did you last see your brothers?" Olivia closed her eyes, summoning the memory. "They went that way," she said, pointing to a trail junction. "With him." As they stood there, a current park ranger approached, curious about their interest in the area. When Detective Hammond explained, the ranger, Jason Begay, a Navajo man with 20 years of experience at the canyon, frowned thoughtfully. "There's an old maintenance trail that branches off near there," he said. "It's not on the visitor maps. Back then, it would have been even less visible." He led them to an inconspicuous path, now blocked off with a chain and a small staff-only sign. "This connects to a network of old trails that were used by early tourism operations before the National Park Service standardized everything. Some lead to abandoned outbuildings." Detective Hammond's interest was visibly piqued. "Would these have been active in 1988? Ranger Begay shook his head. "Not officially, but they existed. A few old-timers knew about them." That evening, sitting on the balcony of her hotel room, with the canyon spread out before her, Olivia felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief, refreshed, but also a growing sense that she was finally on the right path. She called Dean, the desert sunset painting the sky behind her. "I think we're close to something," she told him, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. "For the first time, I think someone is really listening." She didn't know that at that very moment, Detective Hammond was making a discovery that would break the case wide open. A connection between a name in the 1988 employment records and a man currently serving time in a Nevada prison for an unrelated crime. A man who had never been an official ranger, but who had briefly worked as a gift shop employee at the Grand Canyon Lodge, before being dismissed for concerning behavior around young visitors. As night fell over the canyon, Olivia watched the stars appear one by one in the vast desert sky. Somewhere in that darkness lay answers she had sought for most of her life. She was closer now than ever before, but still unaware of just how devastating the truth would be. The Nevada State Correctional Facility stood stark against the desert landscape, a complex of concrete buildings surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. Inside, in a sparse interview room, sat Peter Whitman, 67 years old, his once powerful frame now diminished by age and confinement. He had been serving a 15-year sentence for kidnapping a child from a Las Vegas hotel in 2012. Detective Hammond sat across from him, Olivia watching through a one-way mirror, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "I'm here about the Lawson boys," Hammond began without preamble. 1988, Grand Canyon. For a long moment Whitman said nothing, his weathered face impassive. Then he smiled slightly, an expression that sent a chill through Olivia despite the glass separating them. "Took you long enough," he said finally. "I always wondered if anyone would make the connection." What followed was a confession delivered in a calm, detached tone that made it all the more disturbing. Whitman had worked briefly at the Grand Canyon Lodge gift shop, but his fascination had been with the uniform, the authority it represented. He had assembled pieces of a ranger outfit, learned the trails, and practiced speaking with the confident tone of someone official. "Those boys were so easy," he said, leaning back in his chair. "All I had to do was tell them I was leading a special expedition, that I'd chosen them specifically because they looked fit enough for the challenge." Olivia pressed her hand against the glass, tears streaming silently down her face as Whitman described leading her brothers down an unmapped trail, away from the marked paths and regular patrols. He'd taken them to an abandoned prospector's cabin, hidden in a side canyon that had been excluded from official park boundaries. "I kept them there for 3 days," he continued. "Would have been longer, but the search helicopters were getting too close. Detective Hammond, maintaining remarkable composure, asked the question Olivia couldn't bear to voice. "What happened to them, Mr. Whitman?" Whitman's answer was unexpected. "I let them go." Behind the glass, Olivia gasped. "Let them go?" Hammond repeated skeptically. "Into the desert," Whitman clarified. "East of the park. Gave them each a bottle of water and pointed them toward a road I said was 5 miles away." He shrugged. "Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I didn't stick around to find out. And you expect us to believe they never made it out, that no one ever found them?" Hammond pressed. Whitman leaned forward, something almost like regret flickering across his face. "It was over 100 degrees that week. Kids from Minnesota with 1 water bottle each in unfamiliar desert terrain." He paused. "But I didn't kill them, if that's what you're asking. Nature did that." Further questioning revealed nothing more concrete. Whitman couldn't or wouldn't provide the exact location of the cabin or the direction he had sent the boys. What he did offer were details that only someone who had been with Jackson and Jeremy could know. Jeremy had a small scar on his right wrist from a biking accident. Jackson wore a Minnesota Twins baseball cap. They had argued about which trail would be more exciting just before Whitman approached them. These details, coupled with his history of similar crimes in the decades that followed, left little doubt that Whitman was telling the truth. After the interview, as Olivia sat trembling in Detective Hammond's car, the detective laid out what would happen next. "We'll conduct searches based on his information," she explained gently. "It won't be easy. The terrain is vast, and 30 years of weather will have changed the landscape. But we'll try to find them, to bring them home." In the weeks that followed, specialized search teams combed the eastern boundaries of the Grand Canyon National Park. The abandoned cabin was located little more than a stone foundation and rotted timbers now, confirming part of Whitman's story. But despite exhaustive efforts, no trace of Jackson and Jeremy was found. The most significant discovery came from an unexpected source. A retired archaeologist who had been mapping historical sites in the area during the early 1990s came forward after seeing a news report about the case. In his field notes, he had documented finding what appeared to be a makeshift shelter and 2 sets of initials, JL and JL, carved into a juniper tree about 7 miles east of the park boundary. "I reported it to the local sheriff at the time," he explained, "but I don't think they connected it to the canyon disappearance. It was too far out, in a different jurisdiction entirely. That carved tree became the closest thing to closure that the Lawson family would receive. A small memorial was placed at the site, a simple bronze plaque bearing the twins' names, their dates of birth, and the words, 'They found their way farther than anyone knew.' The discovery had different effects on different members of the family. Richard Lawson, who had carried his guilt like a physical weight for 3 decades, found a measure of peace in knowing his sons had survived longer than anyone had believed possible. "They were always resourceful," he said, his voice breaking as he stood at the memorial site. "They were fighters." Margaret, after initial resistance, visited the tree once. She touched the weathered bark where her sons had carved their initials, and something long frozen inside her began, finally, to thaw. "At least they were together," she whispered. For Olivia, the truth brought a complex mixture of vindication and renewed grief. Her childhood testimony, dismissed and doubted for so long, was finally confirmed. But with that validation came the painful reality that her brothers had been so close to rescue, surviving long enough to build a shelter and mark their presence, yet still lost to the unforgiving desert. "I wish I could have done more," she confided to Dean as they prepared to return home. "I was just a child, but I knew something was wrong and no one would listen." "You never gave up on them," Dean reminded her gently. "When everyone else moved on, you kept searching. You brought them home in the only way possible now." In the years that followed, Olivia channeled her experience into advocacy work, establishing a foundation that provided resources for families of missing persons and specialized training for law enforcement in handling child witness testimonies. The Jackson and Jeremy Lawson Foundation became known for its work in ensuring that children's accounts were taken seriously in criminal investigations. Peter Whitman died in prison in 2022, never facing trial for the Lawson case due to lack of physical evidence, but his confession and the subsequent discoveries had changed everything for Olivia and her family. On the 30th anniversary of the discovery of the carved tree, Olivia returned to the site alone. The juniper still stood, the carved initials now protected by a small glass covering to preserve them against the elements. She placed her hand on the trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath her fingers. "You almost made it," she whispered to her brothers, "and now everyone knows." As she turned to leave, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small arrow carved below the initials, pointing eastward, toward hope, toward what the boys had believed was the way home. In that moment, standing in the vast quietness of the Arizona desert, Olivia finally understood that while the truth had come too late to save her brothers, it had arrived just in time to save the rest of her family from doubt, from disconnection, from the limbo of not knowing. The mystery that had defined her life was solved. The little girl who returned alone from the trail had finally fulfilled her promise to her brothers, to tell their story, to make someone believe, and to ensure they would never be forgotten.